candidate data points and just have a conversation ranking high, medium, low on each of the data criteria. And this is really interesting as you start to work your way through it, because it also highlights when there's a different understanding of what a measure might be. So it's conversational in nature. The other thing that's been really interesting in my experience has been, I tend to have some opinions in this world, and I have some favorite measures along the way, and it often turns out that I'm wrong when I stack it up against the criteria, that it's actually not the best thing for right now, that it doesn't score high in each of the categories, and that there's better measures. So I've often been brought around to thinking differently than when I started out the process based on the criteria. And then ultimately, as you go through this, you'll start to see some trends about high highs. Those are good candidates that probably are some first starts. If it happens that you don't have that data, it's either a red or a yellow on the current status, you have a conversation about who's gonna try to figure this out and by when. So again, just going through the process without creating a plan about who and when it's gonna happen, it's not gonna happen. That'll be put on the back burner. The other thing that this tool will bring up is if you have team members who feel really strongly about one particular measure, and it doesn't necessarily rank high, or it throws you over the number you want, which might be 3 to 5 measures per program, then you can say, great, if you feel that strongly, go off and figure out how to collect it. What's the process? Collect some data and let's have a conversation about what you find out to see if it really is telling us what we want to know. So you can also use it sort of as a tiebreaker and send team members off to make their case. So with that, I will pause and let's have a conversation about the tool. And I guess the first question would be, what questions do you have? And then the other part is, how might this be useful? And if you were going to guide the process, because your homework will be to guide this process, what questions do you still have about how to make that happen?
Hey, Kate, this is Steph. I was just thinking, I think you said that we might do this next, but it would be really helpful for me to work through an example. Is that possible for us to do as a group?
Yes, I think we can, and I think we're probably going to run out of time before we can do it.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So here's what do any of you have a brainstormed quadrant that you'd be willing to put up for our next gathering, that if you sent it to me, I could load the quadrant up and we can go through an electronic first culling and then walk through the process on the next time? If one of you or two of you have one that you're willing to share and get some of this work done ahead of time from really smart people in the group, now's the time to volunteer.
Someone remind me when next time is.
Beth, what is next time? Let's see if I have it on my calendar. Our next time is probably not in the next 2 weeks, is my guess. I think it's January 7th. Beth, is that what you have?
I'm looking. Hang on.
I can't imagine. We're not doing it Christmas Eve and we're not doing it on New Year's Day. So I believe it's December 7th.
Yes, it's January 7th.
Sorry, January 7th. All right. So January 7th is when we're going to do this next time. So that's a couple weeks away. If someone wants to send me the quadrant, I could load that up. Okay. And then, so it won't be homework this time. Homework this time should be, do that community effort and really come up with your brainstorm list, and somebody can send me theirs. Thank you, Stephanie, for bringing that up. What other questions or comments have you got about the process?
I have a question about who really needs to be there to get to do this. Who really needs to be in the room?
Um, well, again, it's meant to be sort of a collective process, and depending on the culture of your organization and how transparent you are, um, and what your structure is, right? So I have seen it done with key program people, leadership team folks, sometimes board members if you have a board, especially if they're thinking this is a good tool for their evaluation process, getting their buy-in on the process and how the decisions were made about what to measure and make sure they understand it. I've seen it including funders and clients. So it really depends how far and out you want to go and how inclusive you want to be. And that's all dependent on the culture of your organization, the culture that you want to create in your organization, and who has the time and availability. I think if you have invited people to help you brainstorm, including them in this process, I think makes sense, because they'll want to see why some of the measures got included or didn't get included as it moves along. So it being having them participate and see how those decisions get made will save some time in the long run.
So
I'm assuming that that this process should not be done or is not recommended to be done alone. I also assume that at some point there's too large of a group. Is there an optimum group size, or should you treat it as an iterative process? You know, what do you think about, what are your thoughts about, you know, as your group starts to get large, how to handle that? Because I could see, you know, being 3 or 4 people and very efficient and effective, yet maybe not including all of the voices. So
Yep. And so that again there's so many pluses and minuses to each, right? So that whole, what's the African proverb? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a group or something like that. So there's an efficacy in 4 to 5 people. And there's an inclusion that helps pave the way for smoother sailing, especially if you're talking about major evaluative change. Making sure those voices have a say and know the process will help avoid hiccups down the road. So for instance, for Stephanie, who's thinking, oh my gosh, is this something we're going to take on for the whole organization? Doing small pilots and having very inclusive, intense work so it can roll out in a way that nobody feels like it was ever a foist will become important. I have also seen it go out to a whole big group, come back to a smaller group, and then go back out to a larger group to sort of say, this is what we discovered, what questions, what other things do you have in mind? So you could do it that way as well. And that's worked really effectively. I've done that in some organizations with multiple programs, and they tried to roll it out sort of program by program, but they brought representatives from each program into the center hub, and they worked through each program as sort of a leadership team, bringing all those voices in representatively, and then bringing it back out to their teams and programs to get feedback and adjust along the way. And that was a nice iterative process.
I have another question, Kate. This is Beth. So for like Nina, Caitlin, and Mary, who have multiple programs, or Scott and Catherine and Lindsay, they all work together, but they're sort of also have their own separate programs. Would you have them try to do it all together, or would you have them look at each program and then afterwards look at where there's the overlap in the performance? How would you sequence that?
So I think it would be really, I think it's always interesting to bring other program people in, because there's a piece that you get to learn. It's easier to make decisions for someone else's work, to be honest. And you get to poke some holes in some of the thinking without being mean, right? Just out of curiosity. So if there's 3 of you who work kind of in alignment on different aspects, working together through each of your programs, I think is a really wonderful way to sort of build organizational capacity and get in the habit of having those conversations across somewhat siloed areas of work, if you have the time and can make that happen. And so again, that could be sort of that core group that's looking at it, and then you're individually bringing it out to your other teams and saying, this is cross-pollination of ideas. The other part about RBA, if you're in the same organization and there's multiple programs, if you're you remember that overarching sheet that talks about strategies should be in alignment. And so part of these conversations is if you've identified your population goals of what you're trying to achieve in the broader community, and your organization has these multiple strategies, you should be discovering some alignment across programs. And it may not be exactly the same, but you should be able to see the connection to the bigger picture. And if at all possible, where you can find alignment or uniformity across those measures, across complicated organizations, that also brings in some efficiency that is extremely valuable in an era where we don't have enough resources to evaluate as well as we want to.
Thank you.
I hope I answered the question.
And maybe a few more.
Maybe. How are we on time? I know I was away for a while, and I apologize for those who wanted to get off at 11:45. But if we take a few more minutes, if there's any other questions. Okay. So in Mark's book and on his website, you'll see you can dig in a little deeper on the data criteria. I think you'll find it in his population side, but I have used it effectively, as you see here, in the performance measure side as well. And so your homework will be to read up a little bit more on the data criteria piece, and he'll have some good examples with a little more detail about the communication proxy and data power. And then finish up that brainstorming process. If you haven't done it collaboratively, find a way to collaborate. And somebody or somebody's, go ahead and send me a copy of your quadrant, and I'll translate it into one that we can do some practice votes and then do this criteria up against it. All right, and hopefully next time the internet works, because I'm going to want to be able to see all your beautiful faces and your voting. All right. Beth, anything to add before we send everyone off?
I will, the rest of the books came in, and I will send them off in the mail to people who haven't gotten them yet. So Kate was just referring to a book. You'll get one in the mail.
All right.
Or it may just show up at your desk.
It's like the RBA fairies have arrived. Yay. Okay, everybody. And if you have any questions along the way, you can absolutely email me. And I'm happy to, I think you have an email in the invitation. You'll see it. And I'll try to answer any questions you might have. You can have a happy holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.